I threw rotten meat into the water thinking I'd catch a fish. What came up had black scales and eyes that stared right through me. It shouldn't exist in this lake. It shouldn't exist anywhere. But now it's in my boat, and I just realized something terrifying. I'm not the hunter, I'm the bait. If you want to know what happened next, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see every lake, every river, every dark body of water forever. I've been fishing these waters for 37 years. Started when I was just a kid, bare feet dangling off the old wooden dock that my grandfather built with his own hands. Back then, the lake was clear enough to see straight to the bottom, teeming with bass, catfish, and the occasional pike that would make your heart race. But that was a long time ago. These days, the lake has changed. The water's gotten darker, murkier. Most of the old fishermen have moved on to other spots, muttering about bad luck and empty nets. But me, I'm stubborn. This lake is in my blood, and I wasn't about to let a few bad seasons drive me away. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when I made the decision that would change everything. I'd been out on the water since dawn, trying every lure, every technique I knew. Nothing, not even a nibble. My cooler sat empty beside me, mocking my efforts. The tournament was in 3 days, and I had nothing to show for weeks of preparation. That's when I remembered. Old Pete's advice. Pete was ancient even when I was young, a weathered man with skin like leather and eyes that had seen things he never talked about. When the fish stopped biting conventional bait, he'd told me once, his voice barely above a whisper, you got to give them something they can't resist, something primal, something that calls to their deepest instincts. I'd always used fresh bait, clean, proper, by the book. But desperate times call for desperate measures. In the back of my truck, I had a cooler with chicken that had gone bad 3 days ago. The smell was nauseating, enough to make my eyes water when I opened the lid. But I thought about Pete's words. Predators are attracted to decay. It signals an easy meal, something already dead that won't fight back. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon when I made my first cast with the rotten meat. I'd tied it securely to my heaviest line, using a hook big enough to catch something substantial. The meat hit the water with a wet slap, and I watched it sink slowly into the dark depths. Small bubbles rose to the surface as it descended, carrying that putrid scent down into the darkness below. For 20 minutes, nothing happened. I was starting to think I'd wasted my time when the line suddenly went taut. Not the gentle tug of a curious fish, but a violent jerk that nearly pulled the rod from my hands. Whatever had taken the bait was strong, impossibly strong. I braced my feet against the side of the boat and started to reel. The line screamed as it peeled off my reel, cutting through the water at incredible speed. This wasn't like any fish I'd ever hooked. The power behind each pull was monstrous, and I could feel my arms burning with the effort of holding on. My shoulders ached, my back strained against the force, and I knew immediately that this was no ordinary catch. Then I saw it break the surface about 50 yards out, just for a second. Just long enough to catch a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. Black scales, enormous black scales that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And the size, this thing was massive, bigger than any fish that should exist in this lake. In that brief moment before it dove again, I saw the water cascade off its body in sheets, revealing a form that seemed almost unnatural in its proportions. My heart pounded in my chest as the creature dove deep again, and I knew with absolute certainty that I'd hooked something that would either make me famous or kill me trying to land it. But what I didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning, and that some things are better left in the dark depths where they belong. The battle lasted 2 hours. 2 hours of my arms screaming in agony, my back threatening to give out, sweat pouring down my face despite the October chill. Whatever was on the end of my line was testing every ounce of strength and skill I'd accumulated over nearly 4 decades of fishing. This wasn't just A test of physical endurance. It was a battle of wills between man and something far older than any tournament fish. 3 times it nearly spooled me completely. 3 times I had to let it run, praying my line would hold, before gaining back precious yards of line inch by agonizing inch. The sun had set completely now, and I was working by the light of my headlamp and the pale glow of the moon reflecting off the black water. The temperature had dropped significantly, and my wet clothes clung to my body, making me shiver uncontrollably between pulls on the rod. I'd seen the creature surface twice more since that first glimpse. Each time, my mind struggled to process what my eyes were seeing. Those scales weren't just black. They were wrong somehow. They seemed to shift and shimmer in ways that hurt to look at directly, like they existed in more dimensions than my eyes could properly perceive. And the shape of it. It wasn't quite right for any fish I knew. The body was too elongated, too serpentine, and there was something about the way it moved through the water that suggested intelligence, not just animal instinct. It moved with purpose, with strategy, adapting its tactics as our battle wore on. "Come on," I muttered through gritted teeth, cranking the reel one more time. "What are you?" The creature responded by diving straight down with such force that my boat lurched forward. I stumbled, nearly going overboard, catching myself on the side at the last second. My hands were bleeding now, torn by the line during one of the earlier runs. The pain was sharp and constant, but I couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. I was committed now, for better or worse. Part of me wondered if I was being foolish, if I should just cut the line and head back to shore. But something deeper, something primal in my own nature, refused to let go. Then something changed. The resistance suddenly lessened, and for a terrifying moment, I thought the line had broken. But no, I could still feel. Weight on the end. The creature was coming up, fast. It exploded from the water 20 feet from my boat, and this time I got a clear look at it in the beam of my headlamp. My breath caught in my throat. The body was at least 8 feet long, covered entirely in those impossible black scales. But it was the head that made me want to drop the rod and motor away as fast as possible. It was angular, almost prehistoric, with a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth that gleamed white against the darkness. Of its body, the teeth were arranged in multiple rows, like a shark, but the structure of the jaw was all wrong for any fish I'd ever seen or read about. And the eyes, God, those eyes, they weren't the simple dead eyes of a fish. They were aware. They were looking right at me with what I could only describe as recognition. There was consciousness behind those eyes, intelligence that made my skin crawl. The creature crashed back into the water, but now it was changing tactics. Instead of running, it started swimming directly toward the boat. I reeled frantically, trying to keep tension on the line, but it was closing the distance fast. Too fast. The water churned in its wake, and I could see the powerful muscles beneath those black scales propelling it forward with terrifying speed. When it reached the boat, it didn't thrash or fight like a normal fish would. It simply stopped, floating just below the surface, those disturbing eyes fixed on me. We stayed like that, for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. The predator and the prey, except I wasn't entirely sure which one I was anymore. In that moment of stillness, I felt utterly exposed, like this creature was reading my thoughts, understanding my fears, measuring my worth as prey. Then my phone rang. The sound shattered the moment like breaking glass. I fumbled for it with one hand, keeping the rod braced against my leg. It was Sarah, my daughter. I let it go to voicemail. This wasn't the time, but the distraction was enough. In that split second when my attention wavered, the creature moved. It didn't try to escape. Instead, it swam even closer until it was right alongside the boat. And then it did something that fish simply don't do. It lifted its head partially out of the water and looked directly into my eyes, not at me, into me. And in that gaze, I felt something that made every instinct in my body scream to cut the line and leave. I felt its age, its hunger, its otherness. This thing had been in these waters long before my grandfather built that dock, long before anyone had named this lake, perhaps long before humans had walked these shores at all. This thing was old, ancient, and it shouldn't be here. Before I could process what was happening, it opened its mouth wider than should be physically possible, revealing row after row of those terrible teeth, and let out a sound, not a splash or a thrash, but an actual vocalization, a deep, resonating call that I felt in my chest, as much as heard with my ears. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, a frequency that seemed to bypass my ears entirely and vibrate directly in my bones. It echoed across the empty lake, rolling across the water like thunder, and in the distance I heard something answer, then another answer from a different direction, and another. There was more than one of these things in the lake, and now they knew I was here. My hands moved on autopilot, muscle memory taking over where rational thought had fled. I grabbed my net, laughably inadequate for something this size, and made a decision that part of me knew was insane. I was going to try to land this thing. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe some part of me understood that I'd already gone too far to turn back. Whatever happened next, I was committed to seeing it through. The creature had gone still again after its call, floating there like it was waiting for something. The answers from across the lake hadn't repeated, but I could feel a change in the air, a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The night seemed darker somehow, the shadows deeper, and the gentle lap of water against my boat sounded almost like whispers in a language I couldn't understand. "All right," I whispered, more to myself than to the thing in the water. "Let's do this." I reached for my gaff instead of the net. If I was going to get this monster into the boat, I'd need something with more reach. And strength. My hands were shaking. From exhaustion or fear, I couldn't tell anymore. Probably both. The gaff was heavy in my hands, the metal cold against my torn palms, but I gripped it firmly and positioned myself at the side of the boat. As I leaned over the side, gaff in hand, the creature's eye followed my movement with unnerving precision. It knew what I was doing. I was certain of it. But it wasn't fighting. It was almost like it wanted to be caught. The thought was ridiculous, but I couldn't shake it. In all my years of fishing, I'd never encountered anything that behaved like this. Fish fight because they want to live, to escape. This thing was different. It had intelligence behind those eyes, purpose in its actions. It was allowing this to happen, and that realization terrified me more than any amount of thrashing or fighting would have. I positioned the gaff carefully, aiming for the thick muscle behind its head. "Please don't make me regret this," I muttered, and struck. The gaff point sank deep and suddenly all hell broke loose. The creature exploded into violent motion, thrashing with a fury that made its earlier resistance look gentle. Water sprayed everywhere, drenching me instantly. The boat rocked dangerously, and I braced myself against the side, fighting to maintain my grip on both the rod and the gaff. The creature's strength was phenomenal, and for several moments I was certain it would either break free or pull me overboard. My feet slipped on the wet floor of the boat, and I had to wedge myself against the seat to keep from being dragged over the side. For several terrifying seconds, I thought it was going to capsize me. The creature's tail, powerful and muscular, slammed against the hull hard enough to crack the fiberglass. I heard the sharp sound of splitting material and knew my boat had taken serious damage. But I held on, roaring with effort, using every bit of strength I had left to lever the massive body up and over the side of the boat. My muscles burned, my vision blurred with effort, and I tasted blood in my mouth from biting my own tongue. It landed with a tremendous crash, filling half the floor space of my 16-foot boat. Immediately, I grabbed the heavy tarp I kept for covering equipment and threw it over the creature, more out of instinct than any real plan. The thrashing continued for another minute, then gradually began to slow. I could hear its gills working beneath the tarp, a wet, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. I collapsed onto my seat, chest heaving, hands trembling uncontrollably. I'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, I'd landed it. But as I sat there, trying to catch my breath, reality began to sink in. What the hell was this thing? And more importantly, what was I going to do with it? I couldn't take it to the tournament weigh-in. This wasn't a bass or a catfish. This was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in any lake, something that defied classification. My phone buzzed again. Sarah had left a voicemail. I played it, my daughter's worried voice filling the quiet night. "Dad, I've been trying to reach you all day. There's something I need to tell you about the lake. Some researchers came by the house asking questions about the wildlife there. They seemed really concerned about something. Call me back as soon as you get this. And Dad, be careful out there. They said something about not fishing at night. They wouldn't say why, but they seemed scared. Really scared. They kept asking if you'd seen anything unusual in the water, anything that didn't belong. Dad, please call me back." I lowered the phone slowly, my eyes drifting to the tarp-covered shape in my boat. It had gone completely still now. Too still. I reached out tentatively and pulled back a corner of the tarp, not sure what I expected to see. The creature lay there, its gills working slowly, those black scales seeming to pulse with an inner darkness. But it was the expression. If a fish could be said to have an expression, that got me. It looked almost satisfied, like this was exactly where it wanted to be. Its eye, still watching me with that terrible awareness, held something that looked disturbingly like triumph. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes or the October night air. I'd thought I was the hunter, that I'd made the choice to use that rotten meat as bait. But looking at this ancient thing lying in my boat, I suddenly wasn't so sure. Maybe I hadn't caught it at all. Maybe it had been waiting for someone foolish enough, desperate enough, to use the kind of bait that would draw it to the surface. Maybe it had been waiting for me specifically. Maybe it had caught me. And that's when I heard the splashing, multiple splashes, coming from all around my boat. I grabbed my spotlight and swept it across the water, and my heart nearly stopped. Eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting back at me in the darkness, just beneath the surface, all of them watching, all of them waiting. They surrounded my boat in a perfect circle, and as my light passed over them, I could see more of those black scales, more of those ancient, intelligent faces staring up at me from the depths. The creature in my boat wasn't the prize, it was the bait, and I'd just proven I was foolish enough to take it. Now, sitting in my damaged boat in the middle of a dark lake, surrounded by things that shouldn't exist, I understood with crystal clarity that old Pete's advice had been a warning, not a suggestion. Some instincts should never be appealed to, some hungers should never be fed, and some things that live in dark water should stay there, far from the light and the world of men. The creature beneath the tarp made a sound then, soft and almost gentle, and all around me the water began to move.